Hello, everybody, and welcome to another exciting episode of the Michael and Patty Show. I'm Michael.
And I'm Patty.
And we're coming to you live on a memory stick from the Charlottetown waterfront, overlooking the Hillsborough River, the inlet to Charlottetown Harbor, and the yacht club. It's a beautiful day. Cool, though, 5 degrees.
Yeah, we've had the last 2 days here, which were Halloween and November 1st. We had some really high winds and rain. So the one thing I love about Prince Edward Island, Michael, is how much they take pride, and our children are so important on PEI. We didn't want, and most of the island ended up taking part in this, they didn't want the little ones out trick-or-treating in a bit of a hurricane-like weather system, so they just postponed it until the next night. So last night was trick-or-treaters. For most of the island, there was a few communities that still did trick-or-treating on Halloween, but how cool is that?
Why didn't they just change it to August?
No, but it was so nice. Good for you, PEI. Love PEI.
And the nice thing about it, too, even though we've had that horrible weather coming up from the Caribbean, is it's clearing, and you don't have that overcasty, drizzly, horrible weather that you have in southern Ontario, particularly in the Toronto area that I used to experience for decades around this time of the year, right into the spring. Moving along, if you're new to our podcast, Patty and I have been Prince Edward Island real estate agents full-time 7 days a week. It would be 8 if we could, for over 40 years combined, done over 1,000 transactions easy. Probably 2,000 between the both of us, although I'm not counting. But we try to convey as many situations as we come across on a daily basis for your knowledge, whether you're buying or selling real estate in Prince Edward Island or anywhere in North America for that matter, for the most part. It's pretty well all the same.
It is pretty much the same.
So moving along, first of all, I just want to have a shout out to 40 Below Heating Service. I believe thoroughly that if you are going to hire somebody to do a job, that you hire the right person. If you're getting a quadruple bypass on your heart, would you just want to hire your general practitioner that has a sideline in dentistry and automotive repairs? Or do you want to hire somebody that specializes in and has done thousands of quadruple bypasses? Well, it's no different when you're maintaining your boiler. Typically in PEI, most of our heating systems are oil-fired boilers, and one of the things I find that people don't do as homeowners, number one, they don't get them cleaned every year, and more importantly, they don't get them checked out by a certified boiler technician, opposed by somebody that's just going out there to clean the furnace. And a lot of times these boilers, particularly if you find your oil-fired boiler is problematic and it's shutting down all the time, it probably hasn't been set up electronically or physically from a mechanical standpoint, or maybe it hasn't been installed properly. At one house that was constantly going out because the way the vent is it basically just picked up all the high winds and kept blowing the furnace out, and the computer was giving it an error code and you had to manually reset it. One of the things I like about 40 Below is he specializes in these types of oil-fired boilers, and he has turned many of these problematic boilers into a boiler dream.
The other thing I like about 40 Below, because I use them for my office building as well, as they're responsive. They will return your call back in the same day, as well as they will be out there in as timely of a manner, or if it's an emergency, I know they'll do their best to get out there the same day or first thing the next morning. So great shout out to 40 Below Heating Services. You're doing a great job.
I called them for a recirculation pump that had gone out or it had seized, and they're there the next day. We're going to talk more about that exciting topic further into the podcast. But first, we're going to talk about your use of drugs and alcohol during the Christmas season, Patty.
During the holiday season, yes, just for sellers and buyers, there are still real estate transactions happening every day, and they continue during the holiday season as well. So not to assume that everything has quieted and settled. Please know that properties do still sell, people do still move. Now, further to that, while you're out, you're having a great night, you've had a couple glasses of wine, and you're a seller who ends up receiving an offer on your property. Whether it's you, the seller, that's had a couple to drink, or perhaps your agent's had a couple to drink, please know best practice and common law. There's really nothing specific within our rules and regulations on Prince Edward Island stating this clearly out, but we are not to handle or sign legal contracts while we are under the influence of alcohol or any other substance for that matter.
Well, first of all, Patty and I are not lawyers. We're not giving legal advice here. But what we can say is based on our research of what has happened in Canada and the U.S. for that matter, if you're entering into contractual agreements for purposes of this discussion, real estate agreements to buy or sell a house, and you've been drinking and you're intoxicated, and down the road you've decided that you want out of that agreement, you could, from what I see, you could go to court or a judge and say, listen, I was under the influence, I wasn't in the right. I think the terminology legally has something to do with right frame of mind or mental competency. I wasn't mentally competent, I was drunk, I had 20 shooters when I signed the contract, therefore I want out. This is not something you should be doing. And the reason we're bringing up this subject is because there was one incident where an agent, a new agent, thought he was the deal maker, and he's answering his phone, negotiating deals, whether at a party, presumably drinking alcohol, and then the next day it turned into a big circus because it was a he said, she said. My rule of thumb has always been, don't pick up the phone, don't negotiate, don't answer texts or emails or nothing if you've had any alcohol or drugs. I don't do drugs, I haven't drank in years, and I know you have maybe one drink a year, but that's always been my rule. And we should adopt that when we're entering into real estate contracts. It doesn't take a lot of common sense for an agent to say, it's 11 o'clock at night, I'm at a party, I've had a few drinks, why don't we discuss this tomorrow morning?
Yeah, and so I wouldn't say to ignore, don't respond. If you, most of us carry our phones around with us all the time, but it would be best practice just to send back a quick message and say, I am out right now and not somewhere where I will be able to address this. Are we able to deal with this offer or situation contract tomorrow? And that would be the best thing to do. And most times agents, and if you're a real estate agent, make sure that you reach out to the listing agent and find out, is this something that you'll be able to address tonight, whether it's the agent themselves or it is the seller? And if the answer is no, please leave the contract open until the next day, so that in this situation, it was left open until 5 o'clock the next day. So there was no reason anyone felt in a panic to quicken respond to this. Best practice is to no alcohol or any substance consumption if you're going to enter into a legal contract. Now, just to further what you had said, Michael, if you can't, it's not so black and white that I was under the influence, so therefore the contract a month or so later becomes null and void. If all your behaviors in between those two time periods was clearly showing the intent to actually purchase or sell the property. So if you're signing amendments and deletions and allowing home inspections, that's a little bit different, and you wouldn't be able to necessarily get out of the contract. But again, we're not lawyers. It's just to make sure that, again, we're coming up to the holiday season. Please be mindful of when you're signing your contract agreements. Slow down a little bit, and it might be best to do it the next day with a clear head.
Absolutely. Here's something interesting. Now, depending on where you research this, there's been a lot of talk, particularly in the YouTube, and I've seen this on the news as well, about Airbnbs being found to have cameras. And the stats are anywhere between 0.76 and 20%. And the numbers seem to lean more towards the 20% than the 0.76, that they've found that Airbnbs have had cameras. And then, of course, the question came up, well, what about hotels? Well, they said hotels were nowhere near those numbers. They were practically at zero because they had a reputation to protect. And I mean, one major chain finding cameras in a hotel room could take down the whole chain. I can see the stock crashing that day if they're found to have cameras. But Airbnbs, which individuals are owning, not so much. So there are apps and there are simple methodologies you can use with just simple things like the light and the camera on your phone to see if there's any cameras, to just be cautious, particularly of things that are plugged in the wall that have a constant power source.
Yeah, I was really surprised, Michael, because you shared with me this video that is on YouTube, and they can hide cameras because Amazon and all these platforms where we can easily purchase products now that we typically would have to spend months trying to find a store that sold them, they hide in your smoke detectors, they hide in lamps, they hide in outlets. Like I couldn't believe all the little spots that I've stayed in Airbnbs in the past. And I would never have thought, I know their doorbell camera had a camera on it, obviously, or their doorbell had a camera built in. But I never would have thought that anywhere else, because I went through and I thought I was being really diligent about it. But it is advised, go to YouTube if you are somebody that does stay in frequent Airbnbs and look up ways and methods to maybe survey the home that you're about to stay in to make sure you're protected, you're not being watched.
Well, I know a lot of the major camera retailers online do have a surveillance section. And I mean, you can buy cameras now that are like a pinhole in a piece of drywall. They hide them in clock radios, air conditioners, smoke detectors are a favorite, microwave ovens, kids' toys, lamps. They could be anywhere.
Pictures.
So just be aware of that. Do your research. On to the next topic. I did something stupid the other day, which I should know better than.
What did you do?
I set a closing date for the end of the month. And I was wondering why the lawyers were so busy.
Not a good plan.
Do not make the closing date on a purchase and sale at the end of the month if you can help it. It becomes a habit because everyone wants to do everything by the end of the month or the end of the year. But when you make your closing at the end of a month, if you're dealing with a busy real estate office, they probably have a ton of contracts that day. And the more contracts and the more chaos and the bigger the circus, the more errors are going to happen. So make your contract close maybe the middle of the month or a week into the month. And also never make it on a Friday because Murphy's Law will say something will go wrong. And of course, you're sitting there until Monday to have things rectified. And if you're renting a hotel room or you're waiting in your RV or your car, you don't want to be doing that over a weekend.
No, and the other thing is sometimes we have, and we're seeing this more and more, where somebody has to close on their property in order to make their purchase going forward. And if you put that on a Friday and the end of the month, you can see the storm and the really bad situation you created because somebody is going to end up being homeless over the weekend versus our policy at our office is we don't close on a Friday. If it's land and no one's going to be impacted, it's not a big deal. But if it's a residential property and I know that there's going to be a family put out or a couple or an individual, we always try our best to close between Monday and Thursday. So if you're a buyer or you're a seller, please be mindful of this.
We were privy to a conversation there a little while ago, which was rather astounding, where the agent recommended that the purchasers and vendors use the same lawyer because it became so convenient for this agent. What are your thoughts on that?
Best practice. Now, there are some great lawyers out there. I mean, most of them, not to say some, most lawyers are pretty good, but I'm going to say my percentage that I have experienced over my years of real estate is it's almost 50-50%. 50% of lawyers will not enter in to a limited duel where they're representing both the buyer and the seller in the transaction. The same applies with real estate. And some will. They're completely okay with it. It is good as long as everything is going well. But it is bad as soon as something goes sideways. And I wanted to provide a little bit of education to this particular individual, this agent that I was working with, just to let them know that in my professional opinion, and if you're a client of mine listening, you know that I will advise you to find your own lawyer or have your own representation. Many years ago, and this is when I just became a little bit black and white on this. Obviously, it's always the client's decision and choice, but my job is to educate them. But a few years ago, I was representing the buyer. There was another brokerage representing the seller. Both clients decided that they were okay using the same law firm. What ended up happening, and it's so unfortunate, and it just left such a bad taste in my mouth, that the buyer's lawyer, because of the relationship dynamics within this law firm, they swayed in favor. My buyer never got no representation. They were just basically, the seller was an influential individual, part of, and I say this very nicely, but part of, say, like a good old boy group. And unfortunately, I felt my seller or my buyer client wasn't properly represented. The lawyer ghosted them for days, and this isn't standard practice. But going forward, I've advised all my clients, I feel you should have your own representation because your lawyer can fight right to the bitter end should a situation arise. Again, if most times everything goes well, but when it doesn't, it can turn really ugly. And I felt really bad for this. There was a senior couple that they lost their deposit, even though they had every right to get the deposit back.
As far as I'm concerned, it's black and white. You shouldn't be using the same real estate agent for the buyer and the selling side, buying and selling side, or the same lawyer for the buying and selling side. Some may argue if it's a really simple transaction, like you're buying a building lot and there's no conditions and blah, 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 it might be okay. But I still think both the purchaser's real estate agent, if they're representing the vendor, and the purchaser's lawyer, if they're representing the vendor, you're sort of walking on eggshells as to what information you can convey and what you can negotiate and can't negotiate. It's just best to absolve that type of relationship and have your own representation. No different than if O.J. Simpson had lawyers representing both the defense and the prosecution. It makes no sense.
No, it makes no sense. And in some ways, because the job is far more challenging, and it's a funny point that you bring that up, Michael, many seller clients feel that if you bring the buyer, can you discount your commission? They have no idea how much additional work and how it is not an easy position to be in. And whether you're a real estate agent or you are a lawyer, to try to, and like you say, tiptoe that line of how much do I share? You're constantly trying to re-police inside your head going, okay, this information I can't share, this information I'm obligated or responsible to share. And it's so much more stressful, easier to stay on the one side.
When I moved here in 1998, October 10th, I think it was, or 12th, basically everyone left their car unlocked, their doors to their house unlocked for showings. It was just, go show the house, let us know when you're done, leave a business card, and away you go. But as more and more people move to the Maritimes, you will find, we really haven't seen it in PEI yet, but it's just like going up in a private plane. It never hurts to have a parachute with you, and it never hurts to lock your doors. So I'm very much into technology, and I love researching different safety measures we can take to protect ourselves, because I think it's better to protect yourself preemptively than one of these people that says, well, I had a break-in and a burglary and they cleared out all the house and then they burned it to the ground, so now I'm going to install an alarm system and cameras. I would strongly suggest you do this preemptively, and I think one of the things you just need to do if you listen to security experts, the advice is simple. Lock your doors and windows, make sure the doors are deadbolts. If you need to, put an alarm system in, security cameras. One of the best things you can have is what?
A dog.
A dog.
Cute little dog.
A giant dog. It's 10 feet long and 6 feet high. Lighting. Smart doorbells are amazing. I just installed them myself. I think I went with Reolink, but there are a number of brands, but it was super easy, worked great. Someone approaches the house, it sends you a text message on your phone. It says, someone just approached the house, here's a picture of them or a video. Apps come with these doorbells. What else? Lock your car. The other thing with cars is, and this was more problematic when I was living in the Toronto area, is don't leave things in your car that make someone want to break in. Like if you have a gym bag full of cash or a bunch of tools or camera equipment, do not leave it on the front seat because they're just going to bust the windows and steal your stuff. And we heard about the wedding photographer, right, on one of the past episodes?
Oh, yes.
So this wedding photographer decides to go out and he does 3 weddings, photos and video. Where does he decide to leave his camera and doesn't bother backing any of this stuff in between the weddings? He leaves it in his car. So not only did the thief steal his camera equipment, but he had 3 couples that got married that now he had to explain, by the way, we have no videos and photos of your wedding because I left my stuff in the car.
That's really, really
with a
sad.
sign on the front window that said, steal me.
That's sad.
So lock up your stuff.
Yeah, and about 10 to 15 years ago, I'd say it was still pretty common. I mean, Prince Edward Island, we are in a bit of a unique province. We are an island that's just connected with the Confederation Bridge. It had always been, and people would say, oh, I don't lock my doors, whether it's your house or your vehicle. But I'd say sometime around, 10 years or so ago, that started to change because of the migration of people seeking out Prince Edward Island, both from across Canada and all over the globe, have decided to make PEI their home. And it is now best practice and recommended to lock your doors and make sure your cars, and I mean, that's great advice. Don't leave your wallets laying out. If you have a bag of cash and you happen to be somebody that sees that in someone's car, you might want to call the police because they may be the thief, not the one that was going to intend to maybe break into that car. But best practice, even on PEI now, is to lock your doors and don't have anything visible. If you have stuff that you can't bring in, then stick it in your trunk. Don't just leave it inside.
I had deals years ago where the lawyers asked for the keys for the house that we sold. And the owners of the house said, we don't have any keys because we never locked our doors. Have you ever had that?
I get that often. Still to this day, I have clients that say, we've never had a key to that door because we just never locked it.
So we talked about buying a thermal imaging camera last week. Well, we actually did it, make things happen because I've always wanted one. And I think they're awesome to go through a house and not only find out how well it's insulated, but in this particular case, in this one house I walked through, there is a bunch of stuff glowing red right around the TV set. As it turned out, they had a Wii game console that had been plugged in for years, consuming electricity. They had a stereo receiver that had been on for years, and they're not using it all. It was just glowing red. Red usually means it's using energy. But in addition to that, I was able to spot out problems with the in-floor heating. Parts of the house was cooler than the other. I was able to spot out walls that are uninsulated. You got to play with the thermal imaging camera, which all home inspectors should have, I would think. What did you think, and what did you find?
Well, I do think it's really cool, and you can scan a room and see where there is some electricity or heat coming from those areas. The other thing that I was playing around with was checking for insulation in the walls that I knew that were just, well insulated and everything completed versus other walls within the home. And there was at least a 3-degree discrepancy, which let me know that there's some areas that perhaps the insulation has settled, and therefore it's not a whole lot insulating your home. So if you're wondering why your heat bill is so high in the winter months, you may want to, because it's not something you can see. I mean, it's behind whether it's vinyl siding or usually some sort of like hardy plank. Well,
Usually,
drywall on the inside, but I'm just saying on the outside, you never know what is, because it's hiding it, what is insulating your home. And this thorough imaging camera allowed to see where maybe there might be some issues, so that you can future plan to, I think we need to take a look at that wall.
And we're not suggesting you go buy a $700 or $800 thermal imaging camera, but we are suggesting that if you do have a home inspection done, it wouldn't hurt to have somebody run through the house with one, because as Patty said, you don't really know what's in between the drywall and the vinyl outside. You'd like to think there's some form of plywood or MDF, multiple density fiberboard, chipboard, whatever you want to call it, Tyvek. Maybe there's a layer of insulation.
And an older home, it'll start to settle after so many years too. And if the home had rodents in it.
But when you say settle, are you referring to the days when they used to insulate houses with hay and newspapers and rags and basically anything they could find around the yard? And then as they get damp, they would settle, so you'd have all these giant air gaps.
Yeah, or they've done the spray in. I've seen some, and they need to be topped up. The second floor is where you would
Well, the
end up noticing
spray-in
that.
foam never moves because it's like a glue.
Not the foam.
Oh,
There's the
I
spray.
know what you're talking about, like when they used to drill holes at the top of the wall in the
Yes.
drywall, and they would fill it full of this blow-in stuff like they use in attics.
Correct.
Which I think some of it was like a recycled newspaper, and then they would spray it so it wasn't flammable. There's all kinds of different stuff. Thermal imaging cameras, I think, are a great way to literally see through the walls.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun to just kind of go through and scan the external walls, look at the temperature difference from internal walls. So if you're looking to have a home inspection done in the house and you're a little curious of this, ask your home inspector if they have a thermal imaging camera. It was fun. Thank you, Michael.
If not, they can borrow ours.
Yeah, they can.
Houses that are on a slab. Have you ever had a house where you walk in and you think, oh, this is such a nice house. It's well done. It's painted well. It's clean. It's just awesome. Big kitchen, big bedrooms. And then, you know what? I go to the door right under the stairs looking forward to seeing the basement because I want to install my man room or the multimedia room, only to find out there's nothing but cement under my feet because they built this house on a slab and there's no basement. What do you think that does for resale value? Because I know you and I have both had houses that have been difficult to sell because they've been on a slab, so you're sort of missing a third of your house.
Yeah, well,
In the case of a two-story or a split entry.
The thing that you're missing with this is what finished space you have or living space you have is all that you have. There's no possibility to finish the basement, maybe for an expanding family, and extra storage. You're relying on perhaps a room off of the garage if the home has a garage, or your garage, if it does, becomes your basement. So it's just not, I don't feel, best practice to have a home. I mean, I know there's lots being built, Michael. I know a lot of elderly senior couples and individuals will say, I don't care, I'm never going to the basement, and I'm fine having a house on a slab. Make sure that you've got cushiony floors because it can be hard on your joints, and it also is something. It's got to be a real niche buyer purchasing that property going forward that doesn't concern themselves or care for increasing the square footage, the living space.
I think the biggest thing you have to look at when you buy a property is look at it like a professional real estate investor would look at it. And what their concern is, mainly, is not how to buy a property. The concern is, what's my exit strategy? Can I sell this house down the road if it's on a slab? Now, I didn't do the stats. I didn't spend a lot of time bringing up statistics as to whether or not houses on slabs or full basements sell for more or higher percentile of ask or higher market value. But I do know that it's disappointing in my experience when people are looking at houses and they go to open the door for the basement to find out there is no basement. The other thing is, as we get more and more into technology and running wires for Cat 5, Cat 6 networking cable or cameras or doorbells or whatever the case may be, sound systems, it's impossible to run cable through a slab, but it's easy to run cables underneath the basement and come up through the walls if you want to run those things through the house. So just something to keep in mind. I'm not saying don't buy a house on a slab. I'm just saying if you do, you may find that your audience, your exit strategy may be diminished based on the fact that you don't have a full basement.
Yeah, you'll have longer days on market, and you may have to take a lesser price than other homes that may be similar but with a basement for sure.
How often do you use GeoLink?
Every day.
So do I. It's my favorite tool. Back in my day when we used to have to go on horse and buggy down to Access PEI to bring up maps, it cost us I think it was $5, and they would give you a map. Well, for the last decade or more, we've had GeoLink. So GeoLink gives the agents or anyone that wishes to subscribe to the service the ability to bring up maps, deeds, the register of what's happened with that transaction, neighbor report, all kinds of stuff. And it's well worth every nickel times 100. But on the bottom of every map, it says, this may not be accurate. So I had an agent last week, which was kind of ironic. he comes up to me and says, well, this lot, I've measured it on GeoLink, and this is what it came out to. And I thought, why are you measuring anything on GeoLink? Because it says right on the bottom, and I took a picture of it and gave it to him. There's a disclaimer. They're not 100% accurate. And I said to him, I said, why aren't you just referring to the survey that we spent thousands of dollars on just a few months ago? Because it has the measurements as per the survey.
That's actually the very fact that you have a survey for this particular property is golden, because a lot of properties on PEI you don't. And I can understand trying to look for an approximation if you don't have a survey. So I'm not sure what the situation.
But why would you try to approximate it off the map when you can just bring up the deed and it tells you what the measurements are? Assuming most properties are a rectangle of some form. Most of them are not that convoluted. So why wouldn't you just go to the deed and it would just tell you, this is the feet on the road. This is how deep the lot is on the east side. This is how deep it is on the west. On the back of the lot, this is how long it is. Why would you try to measure it? What you can do is you can take the deed, and if you want, you can measure the GeoLink, but you want to reconcile it with the deed, because at the end of the day, the surveyor's using the deed. They're not using a GeoLink or some agent's representation as to the footage on any one of those lines.
And that's a great point. So if you're a buyer looking at a piece of property and your agent's telling you they're going to try to do an approximation based on GeoLink or the PEI agricultural map, ask for the Schedule A portion of the deed, because that is where you're going to get the dimensions of the property. You can reconcile it with a geomap to know what the shape is and to know which corners they're referencing. But that's a far smarter way to determine if you're questioning the size of a property. That makes 100% more sense.
And the other thing you can do is you can type in the PID number. We've already established every property on PEI has a PID number, that's sort of a tongue twister. And that PID number, you can search that and it will tell you if there's any surveys that are registered to that PID number.
Yeah, now one thing I will say with regards to the GeoLink, if you are a seller and your agent has brought your attention that it looks like your building might be encroaching or things don't look tidy on your property, and this property is decades old and it was never something you had questioned, or you were the one that developed the property and you just assumed your crew that built the structure or the cottage or whatever it is followed the survey and built within the parameters, don't wait until you get an offer to have this, because every buyer client is going to ask either their agent or the listing agent, is everything on this property on the property? Because Geo looks like it is saying it is off. A lot of times I will find that Geo can be accurate and correct on this, but unfortunately, if you're a seller and you're just concrete saying, nope, it's on, I know, guaranteed you're going to get an offer. It's going to be a condition within the contract agreement that there is going to need to be a survey. I have just experienced that this year.
Plot plan.
And, a plot plan for sure, to do their due diligence and make sure, because it will speed up the process after. And it saves you a lot of headache and time and frustration, both for the buyer and the seller.
Well, in some provinces and states, it's mandatory to have a survey and a plot plan done. A plot plan being a survey with the stuff on the survey as far as sheds and buildings and sometimes easements for electrical lines, whatever the case may be, water, ponds, whatever it may be on that plot plan. So moving along here, Patty, how do we save ourselves the aggravation of turning our furnace on in the fall and finding out it's not working and things are seized up like grandma's legs on a cold winter day?
Oh, interesting. Okay. Well, you should best practice, and I know many, and probably across Canada, but we'll speak for PEI. You have electric heat perhaps, or you're turning off the portion of your boiler system, and I'm not a mechanical person, but to run the actual boiler to heat the home. And as a result, and like the example that you had mentioned a little bit earlier, Michael, your furnace or your boiler does not turn on. It has been off for months. You're thinking, I'm going to save some money during the summer months. I don't need to run this system. Only to finally we have a cold day, you need that heat on, and the furnace doesn't turn over, and you're in a panic to get your boiler service tech or your furnace guy to come out, because what are you going to do? And if you don't have a backup heat source, it's going to be a cold day and a cold night for you.
Well, what happened to me is I turned the furnace on, and then I checked all the rads, and this was done in October when I didn't really need the heat. I did it preemptively because you know when the furnace or the boiler is going to fail. It's going to be Friday night at 11 o'clock at night.
During a winter storm.
Christmas Eve during a winter storm. It's never Monday morning at 9 when your furnace tech is just looking for something to do that morning. So what happened is I fired up the boiler to check out things, and I recognized that there was no heat in the upstairs of the house. None. Rads were cold like ice. So what did I do? I did what any homeowner would have done. I took my thermal imaging camera, which I just purchased, and I checked. I already knew the rads were ice cold, so I didn't have to check them. But what I did do is I went down to the boiler and I put the thermal imaging camera on all the circulation pumps. So when you go down to your boiler, you'll see usually they're red, sometimes blue, 99% of the time they're red that I've seen, with a black cover. And they've got a motor and an impeller inside, and they circulate the water through the house, assuming you have these radiators or cast iron rads in the older houses. So what will happen if these recirculation pumps will seize, particularly if they're old, defective, or in this case, because it's been sitting all year, and the temperature will go through the roof. So the thermal imaging camera showed this one motor circulation pump at almost 100 degrees. It was almost at the point of boiling. So then what did I do? I checked the temperature of the water in the boiler, and it was over 200. Shouldn't be over 200 because what was happening is the circulation pump wasn't exhausting the heat from the water. It was returning the hot water back to the boiler, which is driving that temperature up above where it should be, 165, 185, am I right?
I think so, but this just sounds like a very dangerous situation.
Well, it's not really. Well, yeah, you could cause some harm, but the bottom line is this probably all happened because the circulation pump was sitting there for months and months and months doing nothing, and it seized up. Fortunately, I had enough forethought to test the system before the winter. I called 40 Below in the afternoon. They were there next morning, and I think those circulation pumps are worth about $200, couple $100 for labor, taxes, so just under $500 it was fixed. Bob's my uncle. I have heat, and you get to learn more about heating and cooling.
Yeah, so the recommendation from this is to run your boiler system a couple times, even over the summer months, to prevent it from seizing up. Whether it's like the first of the month, you just want to go in, turn it on for, an hour, a couple hours, just allow everything to flow through, and then be able to turn it off again for the next month. So come up with some sort of routine system. It's no different than testing your generators and all of that.
Which I do every month.
Good for you.
Because what happened during Fiona, you had people pull generators that are sitting in the shed for 15 years and couldn't fire them up because the carburetor was all gummed up.
Yeah, so all these systems that we use for our comfort should be tested regularly to make sure that when you need them, whether it was Fiona or our winter months, everything is in working order. And if you're a first-time homeowner listening and wondering, what kind of things am I supposed to be doing as part of my practice of being a homeowner, we will be dropping tips throughout all episodes from time to time on what needs to be done, what you should be looking for.
And these circulation pumps, they don't necessarily get to that really, really hot point where you can't touch them, 86, 87 degrees Celsius. Sometimes what will happen is the impeller will just break off. So they're still running fairly cool, but they're not moving any water because there is a little test gadget. The boiler techs and myself, we have a technical name for it. You might want to write this down. It's called the spinny thing. So the spinny thing you can put at the back of the circulation pump and you'll see it spin if the motor's turning. But if the impeller's broken, it will still indicate it's turning. It's just not doing anything. Moving along, we mentioned these video doorbells. What do you think of them? Because you've been able to play with them for the last little while as well. We've been looking at them, thinking they're pretty interesting, but I underestimated what you can do with them and how handy they are.
Yeah.
Particularly if you have teenagers in the house and you want to know why they're coming home at 4:15 in the morning.
I do like the Reolink system, Michael, that you had set up. I got to see the app in that, and the notifications that continuously, especially if you're someone that has a lot of Amazon deliveries, it is the perfect tool to use to be able to communicate. If you're in an area where you want to, let's say you've got your kids home and they've got a babysitter and you just want that peace of mind of knowing you don't want anyone going near the house, you can actually, through the one that you have, Michael, speak and communicate with the person at the door, which I think is a really cool feature to have, because it makes it sound like, one, I see you, I'm aware you're at my property. I'm not necessarily, saying that I'm not on site, that I'm not in the house and busy, but I can give directions and instructions. Please leave the parcel here. Could you come back in an hour, or whatever the situation is?
Here's a hypothetical situation. Your 25-year-old son that lives at home orders Domino's pizza. The Domino's delivery man or woman rings the doorbell, and you say to them, please put the pizzas and the wings inside the white pickup truck in the driveway, and then you leave with your paid pizza and wings.
That's not nice.
Let's talk about training by poor example. I've seen this happen for decades where agents get into this business and then they'll tell you, well, this is how I was taught, or this is how so-and-so has been doing it. What do you think about training by poor example and the catastrophic problems that can happen from this sort of educational system?
I would say do not always, and I've also, many years ago, it was just always understood because you tend to find as a realtor, your group that you seem to communicate and ask questions and try to problem solve. But it doesn't mean that they're an expert or a specialist like we talk about, Michael, and even on this particular episode. So they're getting bad advice, poor education. So then where does that translate over to and carry over to would be to the client. And unfortunately, the client is trusting that the realtor knows what they're doing. Most cases, these are just situations that can happen a couple times a year. But watch who you're getting your advice from. And if you're a buyer or a seller listening to this, I'm just going to give you what this solicitor's approval clause is all about, because this can be very costly. As a buyer, you may be paying more for a property because you've got a seasoned agent representing the seller and they tell their seller not to take this risk. And their seller says, well, I will, but they're going to pay more for it. So here's what we're talking about. Solicitor's approval clause. I know we've mentioned this on previous episodes. There are too many agents out there that say, well, I've been told by another agent, or this is my office's practice. We always put in solicitor's approval until closing or as close to closing. That, fine. Your client is protected all the way to closing to walk away from that contract should you decide to terminate the contract agreement. And there doesn't need to be any cause. It is not required for you to say, my solicitor advised me to not proceed with the sale or the purchase of this property. And that's the end of the statement. You don't have to say why, unfortunately. If you are a seller and you are assuming, well, it's solicitor's approval, everything should be good, my agent says it's fine, or they missed it and it's at the end of Schedule A, if you're wondering where this clause is, this could be very costly if you've made a purchase going forward, or if you packed all your stuff, you've got movers and everything, only to find out the solicitor's approval condition has bitten you in the butt because the buyer now has an out all the way up to whatever date is specified in there.
So where this started is an agent said that they learned from another agent to leave the solicitor's approval clause open until closing, which, to put it in legal terms, is completely idiotic. because what it means is you have up until closing to have your lawyer approve the offer, which gives you the ultimate out to walk away. No, we do not leave that clause open until closing. If you insist on having that clause in there because you didn't have enough forethought to have your lawyer inspect your contract before presenting it and save everybody a bunch of time, if it is in there, make it 7 days or 3 days or 2 days. It doesn't need to be and shouldn't be until closing. There is no common sense or logic that makes that make sense.
No, and or even in alignment with your other conditions, typically no more than 2 weeks. Put it in alignment with
I wouldn't accept an offer for 2 weeks contingent on a lawyer reviewing the offer.
Well, but some
3 days, 2
you
days.
give them. You're a real type negotiator.
Why would I sit around with a contract not knowing if it's going to go together? And how many times are the lawyers going to say, oh, it's great, looks perfect, Patty. Oh, it's the best offer I've ever seen. It was so good, Patty. I showed it to all the other lawyers in the office, and they all gave me a thumbs up. No, they're always going to find something, as I could or you could, that could be tuned. So 2 or 3 days. I want to know if that contract's firm, and then you can get into your financing and your home inspection and whatever else.
Yeah, so this could cost you the property if you have an agent on the other side that has a very firm opinion on the solicitor's approval. Your contract could be rejected, or, better, especially if you're in a multiple offer situation, you may lose out on that property and not know why, because we're not obligated to give an answer as to why a seller client moved forward with another offer. We just state that my client chose the offer that best suited their needs or that met their needs best. So just so that you're aware, that solicitor's approval clause could sometimes, in some situations, cost you the property or end up paying a little bit more for it. And who is the solicitor's approval clause in there? Really, at the end of the day,
the solicitor's approval clause, in my opinion, was developed to protect the agent writing the offer. Because if the purchaser removes that clause and then complains that my lawyer didn't have a chance to look at it, or I wanted this in there, I wanted that in there, the agent can turn around and say, well, I gave you the opportunity to have that clause included, but you decided to omit it. And you may have even signed a form that, against the agent's suggestion, you've removed it. They're protected. It's not in there typically to leave it there for something to do, which so many agents are doing. A lot of the agents think that, oh, it's on the form, we have to use it. Right?
Yeah, no, and you don't have to.
There's a lot of stuff on the form today that wasn't on the form 20 years ago, but the agents think, oh, it's on the form, so we have to do it.
Yeah, and contract agreements, and this probably applies to anything that there's a contract agreement, and purchasing homes is one of those items where our contracts, and they used to only be like 4 pages, I think, Michael,
Originally, it was 1 page, I'm thinking. I don't even think there's a Schedule A. I think it was just a purchase and sale. There was no agency. You didn't know who represented who. Then when they brought in agency, everyone was representing the seller. There was just seller's agency. There's no dual agency. There's no purchaser's agency or buyer's agency. And then they brought out state-of-the-art technology, which they called the Schedule A, which originally had a water test and a home inspection on it. I don't think it had much more. And then it evolved from there.
Yeah. So the contracts have evolved and have become longer and longer as a result of situations that have arisen, and to make sure that the clients are protected, the agents are protected. So just know every clause in there is because of something that went sideways, and to make sure it doesn't happen to someone else, which is the benefit of working with a realtor and not trying to sell your home yourself or purchasing a home yourself being unrepresented. Our contracts have been created over decades of situations, ways to make sure our contracts are fair. They're to represent both parties the way the clauses a lot of times are written, which is why if you leave the solicitor's approval, I know one lawyer on the island that I wrote a contract. It was solicitor's approval. It was a piece of land. And the lawyer totally dissected this contract and said, I wrote a bad contract. And here the clauses they were complaining about were the standard clauses that were within our form. I never wrote a single personal clause on my own. And unfortunately, those buyers they were terrified and they never moved forward with the purchase and they lost out on the property in the end. The clauses are written to be fair, and a lawyer, obviously, if they're representing the buyer, is there to protect the buyer. If they're representing the seller, to protect the seller. Our contracts are to walk that fine line to make sure that it is fair, but that the buyer gets an opportunity to do their due diligence to be protected.
In reference to Prince Edward Island real estate, which mainly is what this podcast is about, our forms, if you compare them against other states and provinces, are pretty basic. I remember looking at a contract from a house in Arizona. I think it was 496 paragraphs. And in that state, I know you do this, they're doing it in Florida and other places, they can customize each and every paragraph. So you have to read each and every paragraph of a 492 or 96 paragraph contract, where in PEI, the contracts are pretty basic. But just like Patty said, anyone can take any paragraph. You could take the home inspection paragraph and turn it into 20 pages.
Absolutely.
But the essence of the contract says, you're going to get a home inspection done. If you're not happy with the results, you can go away. You're off the hook.
Yep.
But if you wanted to, you could do so much to that paragraph. Who's going to inspect it? At what time does it need to be inspected? What are the qualifications of the inspector? What documentation does the home inspector have to supply to us if they decide to walk away? There's so much you can do with all these paragraphs. But basically, in PEI, rest assured, the contracts are still pretty basic stuff.
Yep. Pretty black and white. So thanks again for listening to another episode of the Michael and Patty Show, otherwise known as MAPS, PEI's podcast that helps guide and navigate you through the buying and selling of PEI real estate and a little bit of information, generally real estate anywhere in North America. We appreciate each and every one of you for downloading and listening in. And if you are new, there is also a Facebook group, Moving to Prince Edward Island from the Michael and Patty Show, which there is summaries of every single episode. I am slowly getting us caught up. We're releasing 3 a week on there, so you'll just get to see a little summary so you can plan on which ones you want to listen to, especially if time is of the essence and you want to be educated quickly on matters that are important to you.
Thank you for listening to episode 107. We're almost at 2 years now producing this podcast, and we've doubled our listenership from 2 to 4 listeners. Of course, the 2 are family members. Have a good day, everyone.
Have a great day.